If Goku and Broly were born fused, it's an interesting idea because it's pretty absurd even for these X and Y characters born fused as Z character format Dragon Ball timelines. At first glance, it rings either along the lines of something like the Frieza and Cooler one, just swung to the opposite end of the spectrum, offering a main player character an unearned power-up that vastly reduces the difficulty of the grand majority of the story as we canonically know it. Here, it'd just be the most famous hero of the story rather than the villain. That said, Broly is also up there on the list of famous villains, though he might describe himself more as the devil. Or on the other hand, one might even assume to take this more in the route of something gag-oriented, like Chaozu and Cyberman, or even the Mr. Piccolo fan comic, or that time I got reincarnated as a Yamcha, an elevation of a more serious or goal-oriented character, with another who the Dragon Ball fandom has a more joke or meme-affiliated association and appreciation for, allowing a wackier approach to a Dragon Ball story. So recognizing that spectrum, this video will be part story idea analysis and somewhat power scaling, and then I will give my take on how I would run it as a narrative what if. I want to stress that I also say this is an interesting idea because you could honestly approach the story from a lot of different angles, just off the basis that you have to decide, number one, which version of Broly to tell your story about, since Super Broly and Z Broly are two very different characters with different stories. Number two, you have to decide how to adapt your what if, since there are multiple routes there as well. Like, do you fuse the entire Goku/Broly family, combining Paragus and Bardock into one character as well? Because that alone is maybe worth at least a small one-shot in and of itself. And I'm not just saying that because I'm the guy who can make a 15+ Bardock what if, and have the playlist somehow exceeding 29+ videos at the time of recording before the series is even over. I also don't say that because I would want to make a lot of Invincible/Omni-Man jokes just because it would mean Bardock would technically have a mustache in such a story. But I more mention it just because it's not entirely a bad story concept, even outside of an April Fools context, though we'll kind of inherently touch back on that later as I actually get to my narrative section of this what if. Fusing the entire family is also an easy way to decide on question number one, by the way, since you could essentially have Raditz and Z Broly born fused. Again, another idea that can actually hold a lot of weight since it has the same contrast of the Saiyan hierarchy as Goku and Broly do. Here though, you'd be able to use them as the quote-unquote older brothers in the context that Super Broly is a younger concept than his original movie counterpart. So you could then fuse with Goku as the younger brothers, and then probably adapt your Saiyan invasion a lot like Legend of Dragon Ball tale. And with that inspiration, you then have a great base to give the story a continuation from where the fan film ends off. Number three to decide on is how you want to approach your story. Is it a speed run of Dragon Ball because Goku and Broly's power combined is too daunting for anyone else in the universe, or any other one to stand up to the point that during the Tournament of Power, Universe 7 doesn't even need a team. They would just kinda need the fusion of Goku and Broly to stand at the center of the ring, and then power up until the other universes simply forfeit out of respect for their own safety. Or do you maybe play it out more methodically and earnestly, making it more about the story and character exploration? Maybe answering what the biggest joke of Coroli's existence is. He is so powerful that he eventually becomes his own most dangerous rival. He'd essentially have to use the Dragon Balls very often just to wish for someone strong enough to spar with, inadvertently creating the very villains he has to defeat. That's also a very valid path to explore with the concept if a writer is skilled and creative enough. For that matter, you could also go with a Superman has trauma, and so has placed mental blocks on himself that prevent his full power from coming to the surface until later in the life trope, so that the Broly part of the fusion doesn't really kick in all too significantly until it's really needed, allowing you to slow things down and still enjoy high stakes and the contributions of other characters. Though personally, I think that mutes too much of Broly and a lot of the fun of actually doing the prompt, since it should after all feel as if two characters were born as one. Therefore, with just an initial overview of the idea, you can genuinely squeeze about 3 or 4 whole other good what ifs out of just asking what if Goku and Broly were born as Coroli, as well as explore a bunch of fun and intriguing routes with each more different than the last, depending on preference. Considering the actual concept of such a story though, here is the route I will be taking for my April Fools one-shot. Lastly, before we get to the narrative of the timeline, I want to acknowledge that as in Dragon Ball Fusions, Coroli is originally presented as a fusion of Z Broly and Goku, since Super Broly didn't exist at that point. The film was likely in development of some stage by the time Dragon Ball Fusion was out, it just wasn't announced yet. So by virtue of that alone, I do feel somewhat obligated to tackle this with the original Broly first, and then maybe the next chance I get to do what ifs in this style will circle back to use Super Broly. This imposes a challenge though, as Super did a lot to give Broly more to work with in terms of characterization. He just wasn't as yappy and gloaty as Z Broly was, so it's not really verbal, but it's stuff we can have the character do and talk about as part of their backstory. And this isn't really even examining the Goku after the fused birth yet. That said, there is also the very paradox of Coroli existing in general, just all the fact that Z Broly and Goku had conflict even as children. So would someone suggest some disharmony in Coroli would have been present as well, despite there being obvious benefits. And that internal discord is just something you couldn't really explore with the fusion of Goku and Super Broly. So just imagine a child born on planet Vegeta, crying his little lungs out with a power level that shifts and ebbs like the tides of a raging sea. Potential and combat strength upon birth that doesn't just ping the scouters, it terrifies the entire Saiyan hierarchy, as be the number 10,003 or 30,000 plus. The moment this awesome power is revealed, the fate of this timeline would shift dramatically. But there is one who hears of the growing plot, and to save his newborn son from the king's executioners, the boy's father, a former low-class scarred and mustachioed Saiyan, whom had worked very hard to earn his way into the ruler of all Saiyan's inner circle by the name of Baragus, would commit the ultimate treason. Defying his lord's orders, Baragus would fight to rescue Coroli, and then would end up sending him to the Earth, a safe planet he is certain will be out of the reach of the Saiyan and Frieza empires, at least long enough for his son to grow into a man. As ever since a strange mission he once had with Team Baragus to the planet Kanasa, he has been plagued with bizarre visions of the future. Thus, when his act of rebellion as a father is finished, he decides to rebel as a Saiyan, evading his royal pursuers and lying in wait for the day he has known would come for a long time. As Lord Frieza sets out to destroy planet Vegeta in this timeline, the Saiyan who attempts to change the future is far stronger than Bardock alone would be. Possessing the strength of Paragus as well, a warrior with a power level likely more than double that of even the Saiyan royalty decimates a large portion of the Emperor's forces, making a very much long-lasting impression before he is ultimately consumed in a supernova that destroys his homeworld. Though as he is sent to the home for infinite losers, Baragus is laughing like a maniac at some absurd future that only he can see. And as baby Coroli speeds away from the exploding planet Vegeta, he is disturbed and upset into the most violent tantrum of his young life so far, one more intense than even Broly could manage in the original movie canon. However, as a naturally fused being, and sensing that the Broly side of its nature is too volatile to withstand right now, the young pure Saiyan subconsciously suppresses it, just to survive and obtain some modicum of peace as he drifts alone through the cosmos, now officially a sleeping giant. When he finally arrives and is found by Grandpa Gohan, it is as if he were any other low-class Saiyan boy, and with the name Son Goku still being gifted to him, though even suppressed, his power level would likely still be quite substantial by Earth standards, making him pretty hard for Gohan to manage alone. And probably for the best, still leading to Coroli taking on a head injury, with it from there being entirely possible that Kami could intercept the Saiyan's pod before the old martial artist could, in which case he will be faced with the dilemma of whether to raise the boy or risk the sin and possible backlash of attempting snuffing his life out before he has committed any sins. As Kami raising Coroli certainly is an interesting concept, though I think some may feel it a bit too far departure from the story at hand, so I would just compromise and say that Kami will be earlier present and involved with Goku's initial upbringing, as the Uzara transformation that originally killed Grandpa Gohan in this timeline could be a truly world-ending threat, especially since Coroli still gets flashes of his past that make the young Saiyan quite emotional from time to time. Since Coroli wouldn't have had a screaming and crying Goku to hate, he would instead likely have vague memories of his fellow Saiyans that threatened his life, which the dormant Broly side of the secret fusion would come to associate his trauma and grudge with, instilling a hatred for the vague concept of some creature that was like him but wasn't human, and thus from the start of the series, letting Coroli have some minor awareness that he is not fully human, as if the whole monkey tail and strict orders to never look at the moon thing weren't dead giveaways. But even though this timeline is going well enough that Grandpa Gohan survives and Kami trains Kakarot, or in this case Coroli, early, it wouldn't actually lead to Coroli growing all that much stronger, since he's secretly more powerful than his mentors, even if he himself doesn't know it yet. But this also doesn't mean they can't impart their techniques and discipline onto him, with this going a long way to make his mind and spirit stronger to match his body, as well as to bring more harmony to his secretly fused nature, and without the need of any kind of suppression technology. Thus, when Bulma arrives looking for a Dragon Ball and a bodyguard, she gets a far better one, who makes the Pilaf saga a literal piece of cake, likely skipping the Great Ape transformation at the end, because Kami and Gohan would likely keep lopping that tail off anytime it popped back out, thus leading to a likely non-rush wish for the heroes, which for his efforts will be gifted to Coroli, who might wish to know from the dragon how it can attain inner peace, though he is both confused and excited when Shinron responds that his wish has been granted and will be answered once he has become the strongest under the heavens, leading Coroli to Master Roshi and the Turtle School in preparation for the World Tournament. Obviously, training with even a suppressed Coroli would mean pretty crazy implications for Krillin and a lot of other characters' power. But here, Coroli would finally receive worthwhile training, for a mysterious reason that isn't just Roshi being arguably an even better teacher for a being that is made up of Goku and Broly both than he could be for either of them alone. However, the most shocking event is that during the 21st Budokai, after sailing through the majority of the competition and being bored, he still winds up somehow struggling against Jackie Chun, because upon his wish, Shinron would have secretly granted the old martial artist maximum power, greater than that of Coroli's, which even Roshi is not fully aware of, but is already fully mastered, and enhanced further beyond the young Saiyans, through diligent application of the Turtle School way, as the true magic that will grant Coroli inner peace is finally coming to know what it means to taste defeat, and learning the fundamental lesson that there can always be so much stronger, even for him. However, with this challenge finally activating Coroli's Saiyan blood fully for the first time, and thus begins to entirely wake up the Broly side, he doesn't just go down because his legs aren't long enough to reach and win a kicking contest, but instead by making sure to prove to all that he will one day be the strongest, as he temporarily enters a restrained false super state and accidentally punches a hole through the moon before he is subdued and then finally wrung out by Jackie Chun, and later counseled by Roshi that he need not be his own greatest rival or spend time fearing his own strength if he never abandons the Turtle Hermit way. As Coroli heeds Master Roshi's lessons on focusing mastering himself and his power, and not so much to simply get stronger, it works not just as a means of vastly elevating Coroli's warrior foundation as opposed to Goku or Broly's in canon, but also to keep him from accidentally vaporizing the planet every time he sneezes or gets angry because he hurts himself while training. With every other Dragon Ball era challenge going just as simply as Pilaf did, as by this point, none of the early movie villains, the Red Ribbon Army, Crane School, or the Demon Clan can really hope to challenge Coroli, even if he doesn't even get a little bit stronger than he was when he was born. Even Garlic Jr. and Dr. Willow pose no real threat, with likely all of these characters being forced to submit and redeem themselves to the side of good, in a very forceful addition to Coroli's version of the Z Fighters, as he really isn't all too against beating someone and then directly forcing them to be his underling, and not commit evil acts anymore, rather than just asking for it like Goku would, since the Broly half of the fusion was once a part of Paragus' army in the film, and Coroli's Z Warriors would likely be a lot closer to the size of an entire army too. Plus, in truth, that army was really following Broly, so it wouldn't have really mattered who was controlling him. It could have been Paragus or a turkey sandwich. From here, Chi-Chi would likely appear, even more fervent for courtship with Coroli than she was with Goku, on account that he is even more Saiyan-like in some ways, but also a bit more introspective and softer when he needs to be. Plus, because he is part Broly, the Son Goku in this story would probably be a lot closer to the physical stature of the Ox King, which is literally only going to make him more noticeable to Chi-Chi. And Son Gohan Jr.'s birth here is also interesting, since the secret fusion of Goku and Broly we've so far synthesized, who would be fathering him, is essentially just the Son Gohan Jr. we are familiar with in canon, down to the rage-induced power boost, hidden strength, turning arch enemies good, and being way more superhero-like than just Goku, especially with the heavier Kal-El parallels we've been hitting in this story. And so we can get to the Z era, and somewhat the lifting of the limits fully. The real fun begins when Raditz arrives. In canon, Raditz is a threat by this point, but here, Raditz is stronger, mind you, since he isn't just the eldest son of Bardock, he's the mustachioed eldest son of Baragus, bearing the name Radiguss here. Actually, let's call him Radiguss the Brown Mustache. Though even with more power, he is still not truly a threat, just a trigger, as seeing his older brother try to kidnap Gohan, and with the revelation that the hatred and trauma he feels is towards a race called the Saiyans, causes the mental blocks of Coroli to fully shatter this time, as he finally knows that this is his true name. So that suddenly, the Goku personality, who just wants a fair fight, has to wrestle with the Z bully side to not be completely overwhelmed, as the other side of Coroli is someone who only wants to trample others, to remind everyone that his power is maximum. Suddenly, Radiguss would turn tail and try to leave, after his attacks begin to have no effect on his little brother. On the contrary, it hurts to hit him, and when Coroli catches up and asks where he is going, and his brother responds that he was simply preparing a space pod so he can leave on his own and never return as asked, Coroli questions these motives due to the vessel being large enough to fit two, before the righteously angry father would rescue his son and proceed to crush his older brother in the spaceship before hurling it into the depths of space with an angry and traumatized cry. Though this encounter still intrigues the Saiyan invasion, and maybe even a Crusher Core and Lord Slug invasion at the same time, since the movies would also be occurring here by the virtue of Coroli's existence. Though here, we get a version of the Saiyan saga where Coroli, having tried to quell his anger towards his own people, is trying to give Turles and Nappa a chance to surrender, all while his emerald aura is unintentionally cracking and melting the nearby mountains. And Vegeta and Slug are stunned and immobilized by admiration for Coroli's power, as he is just so goddamn cool. The villains eagerly overlooking Raditz's punishment and the denial of wishes on the Dragon Balls for the sake of following the legendary Super Saiyan into battle against Frieza, whom upon hearing of, Coroli becomes instantly intrigued in, and sets out with the other Saiyans to confront on the planet Namek, after beginning to train and mentor them as well, as the newest and likely weakest members of Coroli's allies. Upon arriving though, with maximum power already achieved, and the fact that his mental barriers are finally gone, and thus, Coroli would finally be able to begin increasing his power level through adaptation to stronger and stronger encounters, as well as the rare Zenkai boost he would be getting from pushing himself through training, just as Goku did. It is highly possible that not only is Frieza the Empire cooked because of Coroli, but as training partners to the secretly fused legendary Super Saiyan, the Emperor would likely have to worry about a Super Saiyan Vegeta, Turles, and Nappa as well. Consequently, things would probably go equally horribly for King Cold and Cooler as well, even with the Big Getty Star. So by the time we hit the Android and Cell sagas, Coroli could either be finally entertained again, if his attempts to subdue the Red Ribbon Army and turn them good didn't include Dr. Gero, who here would build all his creations to target and skill to Coroli, rather than Goku, or we would have to skip the arc as well, or at least we'd have to skip the arc being antagonistic altogether. That said, as I alluded to earlier, Cell in this story would be quite interesting, not just because he too would be cracked with Coroli's DNA combined with others, but also because narratively and time-wise, where it falls, Broly and Cell are actually somewhat movie and canon counterparts counterparts of one another, both in an interesting and different way, being foils of Goku, who specifically mirror and distill his worst qualities in the mindless and sometimes selfish quest for greater challenges and strength. So here, Cell could generally be made by Dr. Gero for revenge against Coroli, or to be Coroli's best friend. It's honestly up to how merciful you think Coroli would have been with Red Ribbon, or how viable you think the idea of Coroli just making every villain turn good, just because he is so strong as an option. Otherwise, if there are no changes, the father-son Kamehameha is just done with Gohan and Coroli, with Cell still being defeated as he would in canon, since realistically, the heart virus is the only way to stop Coroli until Super, or maybe Hirudegarn, since I simply don't see Android 13 or Bojack's odds as any better, with them likely also being bullied to just join the Z-Fighters, instead of getting turned into scrap or goo respectively. And either way we roll, it kinda spits us out in the Buu saga, which would again be one of the only times in his life thus far Coroli has been really challenged, as really only now would his greatest rivals begin to appear, since Buu in this timeline would have all kinds of reformed villains to absorb. Though at the same time, if Cell is created to be good and a Z-Fighter in this timeline, and has therefore been training with Coroli, Buu also may be cooked, or at least, a fighter with power absorption may not be as big a challenge for Coroli. And this is to say nothing of him playing the story closer to Goku, and still spending the time in Otherworld to learn fusion techniques. Yo's son Goku and his friends' return wouldn't be of much interest either, but the outcome of a GT saga in this world could be quite interesting, since wishing Coroli to be a child again would be fascinating, considering controlling his emotions was a major hurdle for him at that point, but also because the Shadow Dragon saga in a story where the main character has almost had to abuse the Dragon Balls just in order to be entertained by stronger foes would go extremely hard, with each dragon representing a different fight Coroli wished was tougher, up until the final showdown featuring Super Saiyan 4 Coroli, possibly fusing with another of his allies, up against Sin/Omega Shenron, while the Daima special could hold similar intrigue, if only just for the visual of a group of Z-Fighters this big being turned into kids, as it would mean getting cool youth designs of pretty much every movie villain, which is a rather tempting prospect as just an artistic challenge. Could also maybe mean demon and power transformations of other characters, rather than just getting a version of Super Saiyan 4 Coroli with big forearms and red hair. Though speaking of red-haired forms, the events of Battle of Gods and Super in the main continuity of this gag timeline continue, and they would also be quite fun for Coroli, on account of the same argument that applied to Vegeta, likely applying to the other reformed Saiyans amongst the Z-Fighters here, making it exceedingly easy to grant Coroli greater powers, as he enters the realm of gods and fights Beerus. Though even beforehand, he likely would have become the ultimate curiosity of Beerus and Whis, since he is technically a mortal who naturally possesses the raw output of a god of destruction, and the ability to revel and think of nothing but destruction. But Coroli in equal measures is also in possession of the ability to calm and center himself, allowing him to act with the calm and tranquil heart of the angels, with it being highly possible they wouldn't care if Broly wanted to train by himself or with as many allies as he wanted to bring, so long as he trained with the Kyria's deities so they could see more of his strength and taste more of Earth's delicious food. When the events of Resurrection F and the Tournament of Destroyers occur, the Z-Fighter roster is so stacked that both arcs are made exceedingly easy, and any ramp in their difficulty is pretty quickly answered by the likes of Coroli, though Frieza, and possibly a revived Cooler, admittedly may have trained a great deal harder, just considering how strong their secretly fused legendary Super Saiyan rival is. And the Coroli Black arc would be where the next greatest challenge comes. However, due to Black and Zamasu making Goku alone enraged during the arc in canon, it is also highly likely that doing so here will result in an immediate lose condition for the rogue gods, as they would quickly be forced to realize that no faker can copy the true, overwhelming might of the strongest under the heavens, legendary Super Saiyajin Blue Coroli, with the secretly fused fighter's bottomless rage from its Broly side, eventually either overwhelming even the immortality of Zamasu, or the quick wits of the Goku side winning out by successfully sealing the villains with the Mafuba, since Coroli, being so pragmatic and mindful, could be less likely to forget the necessary components for something so important. Then, as the Tournament of Power occurs, Coroli has finally achieved Nirvana with all the strong fighters he can test himself against, and with so many strong allies, he is genuinely spoiled for choice of teammates, making it a stress-free experience to pick his partners. As the battle begins, Coroli would quickly end up taking extreme interest in the likes of Jiren, with whom he instantly sparks a more intense rivalry with, that will push both insanely strong fighters higher, as they are fighting on equal grounds here, thanks to Coroli having trained to fight more efficiently, rather than more powerfully just like the Grey, far before he even met Whis in this timeline. Not to mention, he would also be mentoring Kale far more than he would Caulifla, with this making the Saiyan gang leader extremely jealous and angry in this timeline, instead of the other way around. Finally, as the tournament ends with Coroli debuting not only the power of Ultra Instinct, but also the budding embers of what looks to be a God of Destruction mode like Toppo showed off, Universe 7 wins, and makes a wish to restore the erased universes, as well as a special request from Coroli to hold another tournament of power without the stakes of destruction in a period of 3 years, making it more like the Tenkaichi Budokai. From here, obviously the events of Dragon Ball Super Broly don't occur, since Broly, or rather the part of Coroli that would be known as that being, is replaced by his Z counterpart here, while the Galactic Patrol prison saga in this timeline would actually be extremely interesting, since Moro would also be a huge threat to Coroli, and another equalizer in the story just like Cell was, either forcing the characters to adapt and learn new techniques, rely on their android allies, or have their ki fully consumed, and the universe fall under the control of the Mad Goat. In the end though, gaining a better control of his godly techniques, Coroli would eventually come out on top with a bit of help from Ooh, who will one day become his student. Likewise, the Granola the Survivor saga presents a similar challenge, since Plus, the wishes for more power would make fighters above Coroli, and thus really push him to his limits. However, considering he would be growing and adapting at a rate far more maximum and aggressive than Goku did in the arc in canon, the saga would likely end a lot easier than it did in canon as well, like with no intervention by Black Frieza, or at least if there were, it wouldn't be in the same way that displays Frieza, and likely also cooler here, and stronger, with it being entirely possible that by the end of it, Coroli just beats everyone, finding a way to break the lifespan drains on gas and granola, and then forcing them all to join his Z fighters as well. While back on Earth, with a team so stacked, there would be no shortage of fighters to back up an even stronger version of Gohan, and a similarly much easier version of the events of Super here, where at the time of writing, the Dragon Ball timeline has been left on hiatus at, aside from the end of Z. But that is where we'll end our story and our celebration of April Fools off. I certainly hope you all enjoyed and are looking forward to next time we delve into a more wacky and out there gag and joke side of the What If multiverse. Until then, I've been Plus. Remember to take care of yourselves and the world around you, and as always, go beyond plus ultra, and I'll see you guys next time.